During World War II, the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, commissioned a profile of Hitler and discovered a facet of Hitler's private life which the Nazis had tried to keep secret. It was a secret film star Renate Muller took with her to her grave when she fell 3 stories to her death in 1937. She was in her time as famous as Joan Crawford, Marilyn Monroe, Kate Winslet or Angelina Jolie. Yet the memory of her was wiped from the minds of every German, as if she had never lived. And before too long, Germans had other things to occupy their minds. For Jews, life in Germany would lead directly to the death camps, while for German Gentiles there was the promise of a new German empire under Hitler, the Third Reich, to be built through annexation and a Second World War. Millions would die in battle, in the Blitz, in the concentration camps. No one would ever remember Renate Muller, or so Hitler thought, but she was remembered by German film director-producer Alfred Zeisler, who revealed to the OSS how he provided the Fuhrer with female company and that one of Hitler's favourites was Renate Muller. The death of Muller has remained an enduring mystery. Any evidence has long gone, and all potential witnesses have died. But the clues lead to one inevitable conclusion, that Renate Muller was murdered, probably on the orders of Hitler. The chances are you don't recognise this actress from this German film from 1934, but she was in her time as famous as Joan Crawford, Marilyn Monroe, Kate Winslet or Angelina Jolie. This is Renate Muller. And the reason you probably don't know of her is because Hitler had all trace of her life erased. In Nazi Germany, the stars of German cinema were gods and goddesses. But their success and mortal survival depended on their subservience to Hitler and his cause, and also his personal taste, although even the stars he loved the most were not invulnerable to his vengeance should they betray him. Kurt Jürgens was one such actor unwilling to serve the Fuhrer and spent the last months of World War II in a concentration camp. Hitler was particularly enamoured of female film stars such as Zara Leander, Olga Chikova and Renate Muller. Movie stars would appear alongside of him at functions, by command. This page from an American magazine shows him accompanied by Olga Chikova at a garden party given by von Ribbentrop in May 1939. When Hitler wasn't working, he spent a good deal of his time watching films in his own private cinema, and not just German films. He was an ardent film fan and knew all about the stars in his favourite films, who wrote the screenplays, who directed, and when he had nothing better to do, he could be found at Germany's largest major film studios, Universum Film AG, better known as UFA, at Babelberg just outside Berlin. There he mingled with the stars, according to Alfred Zeisler, when he was interviewed on the 24th of June 1943 by the OSS, the forerunner of the CIA.
He loved watching scenes being filmed, asking about new plots, new talent. He had a grasp of technical aspects and asked intelligent questions about technical problems.
As the Fuhrer of Germany, Hitler owned the German film industry. He could spend all the time he wanted at the studios, watching them filming and just mingling with the stars. You would have thought Hitler would have had enough to occupy his mind after becoming Germany's Chancellor in 1933, and then the fascist head of state, the Fuhrer, in 1934 after President Hindenburg died. But in reality, Hitler cared nothing for the politics of governing Germany. That was the job of his ministers. If Hitler couldn't satisfy his starstruck cravings by visiting the studios, he'd find other ways to find out the latest news and gossip.
He'd phoned just to find out about the films being made and the actors in them, or just generally what was happening at the studios. He had a standing order to have every new film, German and all foreign films, shown at the chancellor.
Hitler had the curious notion that a people could be governed by culture, by the music they listened to, by the films they watched, by the art they admired. They would have to watch and listen to the films and the music that he liked, and he didn't exactly have sophisticated tastes.
The ones he seemed to enjoy the most were the American musical comedies or crime pictures, although he frequently enjoyed watching biographical films, especially the ones about people involved in war. I remember the film Viva Villa gave him great enjoyment. He had that shown a number of times. I often wondered when he had time to devote himself to affairs of state. He spent so much time at the studios or on the telephone or looking at films. There seemed to be very little time left for anything else.
He didn't set out to be a politician. He wanted to be an artist, but he failed at that. He tried to be a playwright and failed again. He even wrote an opera, trying to emulate his idol Richard Wagner. He failed at that too. He finally found something he was good at: public speaking. He was thrilled by the enthusiastic reactions he received from his audiences, which he found among the growing number of followers of the Nazi Party. He had become an actor playing the part of a politician, and ultimately he played the part of Germany's saviour. It was a role he had deluded himself into believing belonged to him when he saw a performance of Wagner's Rienzi, which told the story of a white knight who became the people's saviour. Hitler later declared that it was in that hour that he received his personal revelation to become the saviour of Germany. His delusion led him to worship his god Wagner at the Bayreuth Festspielhaus, where Wagner's operas were exclusively performed and which Hitler considered to be the temple of his god. It was also where Hitler made his control centre for some of his aggressive policies, such as the suppression of the Jews. It was becoming harder for Jews to work in any industry in Germany, and even the mention of the word Jew could be enough to send Hitler into a rage, as Alfred Zeisler recalled when interviewed by the OSS.
Hitler liked to come to the studios to dine in the restaurant, where the actors and actresses gathered. He liked to eat amongst the film stars, the producers and maybe their wives, or lovers, comedy stars and the pretty chorus girls. There was one occasion he heard somebody at the next table say the word Jew.
I assigned him even though he was a Jew.
Jew. You say Jew.
And he flew into a rage at them. He carried on for about 10 minutes to the amazement and embarrassment of all the people gathered there, most of whom did not even know what it was all about. My impression is that in the course of such a rage, he works himself into a trance-like state in which he loses contact with his surroundings and during which he enjoys the uninhibited expression of his feelings. I think he wanted to hypnotize people, which is a technique he learned from Erich Hanussen.
Erich Jan Hanussen was a celebrated magician, hypnotist and clairvoyant, who in 1932 correctly predicted that Hitler would become Chancellor within a year. Hitler's rage in the Ufer studio restaurant would have been just one of the stories of the growing persecution by the Nazis of the Jews, which reached German film star Marlene Dietrich while she was in America. Dietrich was one of Hitler's favourites. She was a star not just in Germany but also in America, and was proving to be a valuable ambassador for Hitler. But when she heard what was happening to the Jews back home, she decided not to return to Germany, knowing that she would be forced, as were other stars, writers and directors, to make Nazi propaganda films that were becoming increasingly anti-Semitic. In German films, Jews were portrayed as evil, money-grabbing, warmongering enemies of Germany. One of the very worst of these films was The Jew Sus in 1940, which has come to be known as the most reviled film of all time. Alfred Zeisler was put under pressure to make such films.
Hitler spent a great deal of time trying to persuade me to make propaganda films. The Nazis made me all sorts of offers. But in 1935, I left Germany.
Hitler and his propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels needed a successor to Dietrich. A true Aryan German needed to be chosen, and the chosen one was Renate Muller. She came from good German stock. Her father was one of Munich's leading newspaper publishers, and her mother was a painter. Beautiful, sophisticated and talented Renate was born into a privileged life on the 26th of April 1906. From an early age she developed a love of poetry, theatre and acting, and was educated at the Haase Berg Theatre in Thale, where at the age of 19 she made her stage debut in A Midsummer Night's Dream. In 1929, at the age of 23, she made her film debut. By 1931 was an international star, popular not just in Germany but with American and British audiences. She made 2 films in England, Marry Me and Sunshine Susie for Gainsborough Pictures. This feature on her in a British film book declared, Renate Muller, who will always be Sunshine Susie in the hearts of the fans. In Germany, she had a huge hit with Victor and Victoria. She epitomised fashionable Berlin society, but she refused to make anti-Semitic propaganda films for Goebbels. Renate had personal reasons to not make anti-Semitic films. She had a long-time secret lover. His name was George Deutsch, a director of a German electrical combine, and a Jew. He had to leave Germany after the Nazis began suppressing Germany's Jews. He had to leave Renate too. It was forbidden for a German to love a Jew. Then, on the 7th of October 1937, Renate Muller fell to her death. The next morning, the shocking news that one of Germany's most beloved film stars had died was broadcast over the radio. The Nazi state-run radio reported that Muller had undergone surgery on an injured knee and died from an epileptic fit in hospital. As far away as Canada, the Ottawa Evening Citizen reported on Muller's death. Their Berlin correspondent reported, "It was plumpness that killed her. A slimming diet had led to a nervous breakdown and they rushed her to a Berlin clinic. Last night she joked with doctors and nurses. Early this morning a cerebral hemorrhage caused her immediate death. There was even mention that she never married the man she loved. His name is George Deutsch." That same newspaper also revealed that George and Renate had continued to meet in secret, sometimes in London, where George lived and worked. Before she died, the Gestapo had discovered her secret love affair, which was now revealed in newspapers beyond the reach of Nazi control. Was she being treated for surgery on her knee or for a nervous breakdown? There was a rumour her body had been found on a Berlin pavement. Nazi radio now reported that she had died after falling from the third-storey window of a hospital. Then Goebbels, attempting to concoct a cohesive explanation for her death, had it reported that she had become mentally ill and had committed suicide by jumping from the hospital window. Goebbels' clumsy attempts to stamp his mark on the way Renate died bore all the hallmarks of a cover-up. A post-mortem might have solved the mystery, but there's no evidence that one was ever held. Her body was quickly and privately cremated. There's an old saying that you hide a lie behind a bigger lie, and this Goebbels did by spreading the rumour that Renate was being treated in a sanatorium for an addiction to morphine and alcohol, and that she had jumped to her death while out of her mind. This version of how she died shocked the nation into believing that their beloved symbol of female Aryanism was a drug addict and an alcoholic. Her films were withdrawn from cinemas, and it was forbidden for anyone to publish her name in print, or to speak it on radio, or for any photograph of her to appear. Goebbels wanted it to be as if she had never lived. German film star Renate Muller fell to her death on the 7th of October 1937 from a third-storey window of a hospital, according to Nazi officials. If Hitler had had it all his own way, Muller's death would have been swept under the Nazi carpet into historical obscurity. No one in Germany was to know that she had loved a Jew, for fear that people might start to connect her death to her secret love affair. The persecution of the Jews in Germany increased, and on the 9th of November 1938, Jewish businesses became the targets for violence on what became known as Crystal Night because of all the broken windows. Soon Jews were forbidden from working in any industry, including the arts. Before long, Jews were being sent to the death camps to be murdered in their millions. Men, women, children. Also gypsies, homosexuals, Slavs and other so-called undesirables. No one knows exactly how many were murdered. Most German Gentiles seemed ignorant of Hitler's solution of how to deal with Germany's Jews. The last thing on their minds was what had really happened to Renate Muller, and if Hitler had succeeded in all his ambitions, it would have remained that way. On the 1st of September 1939, he attacked Poland without warning. The country was overrun by the Nazi blitzkrieg. Polish Jews were rounded up by the German occupiers to be put into ghettos and then sent to the death camps. Britain demanded Germany withdraw from Poland. Hitler declined. On the 3rd of September, Britain declared war on Germany, and the world went to war as Hitler began to spread his Third Reich. And he might well have prevailed, and Renate Muller been forgotten forever, but for one thing: Pearl Harbor. On the 7th of December 1941, Germany's ally, Japan, attacked the American fleet at the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Up until then, America had stayed out of the war, apart from providing Britain with supplies. Japan hoped to emasculate America, but it failed to destroy the whole fleet. America could no longer remain docile and declared war on Japan, and Hitler had no choice but to declare war on America. Now he faced an overwhelming Allied force, largely made up of Americans, British, Canadians and Free French on one side, and the Russians on the other. The tide had turned against Hitler, and by 1943 it had become obvious to all but the most deluded Nazis that Germany would lose the war. No one, not least of all Hitler, could know that these events in history would lead to Renate Muller being remembered. Preparing for Hitler's defeat, the OSS introduced a relatively new science called profiling, and in 1943 employed psychoanalyst Dr. Walter C. Langer to develop a profile on Hitler. Dr. Langer studied Hitler's speeches, Hitler's book Mein Kampf, around 400 published works, and hundreds of interviews conducted by the OSS with people who had known Hitler. Dr. Langer predicted, among other things, the possibility of a military coup against Hitler, and that in the event of Hitler losing the war, his suicide would be the most plausible outcome. It would prove to be a staggeringly accurate profile. The report would later be declassified and published as The Mind of Adolf Hitler. As an ironic consequence of this, the name of Renate Muller was recalled by German film producer and director Alfred Zeisler when he was interviewed by the OSS. Although the agent interviewing Zeisler could neither spell his name correctly nor write down the name of Renate Muller accurately. What Zeisler would reveal to the OSS about Hitler would reveal clues to why Renate had plummeted to her death and why the Nazis tried to cover it up.
Oh, hello, Ronnie. What do you have?
Try not to eat it, please. Haven't those girls arrived yet?
Not yet. Who cares?
In 1936, Alfred Zeisler made his first film outside of Germany. It was called The Amazing Adventure, starring Cary Grant. In 1943, when he was interviewed by the OSS, he was in Hollywood making Enemy of Women, an anti-Nazi dramatised expose of Joseph Goebbels. When interviewed by the OSS, Zeisler was asked if Hitler ever met women.
He frequently called me at the studio to send actresses to the chancellery. Some became his temporary favorites. But you know, I was curious about what happened to them. One day, in 1934, he asked me to send 2 chorus girls. On the following day, I asked one of them what happened, and she said...
Nothing in particular.
Nothing?
He just spent the whole evening bragging.
Bragging? About what?
About how he was going to annex Austria. He said he was going to build the biggest army in all the world. He said he was going to fortify the Rhineland. That is how he spent the evening. We thought him extremely odd.
His chief object was to impress them with his greatness and power.
When asked if Hitler had favourites, Zeisler said,
Oh yes. One of them was Renate Muller.
The Fuhrer wants to see me.
Of course.
Why me?
He's a fan. He likes your films. Maybe he would like your autograph.
Did he ask for me personally?
Dr. Goebbels asked.
Do you suppose he will want to discuss my films?
Perhaps. I don't know what he'll want to do.
I will take these inside later. Will I be dining with the Fuhrer?
Perhaps. You'll probably be there till very late.
Will he want me to sleep with him?
What will you do if he does?
He is the Fuhrer. It's dark in here.
It's been dark since 1934.
The OSS agent interviewing Zeisler was surprised to learn Muller was prepared to sleep with Hitler.
He was the Fuhrer. She, a loyal German.
He is the Fuhrer. To a German, that said it all. The following morning, Renate arrived at the studio and stopped by Zeisler's office.
So ready for you on set. Something troubling you?
He wasn't interested in me at all.
Not interested in your films or...
In nothing. Not in me, not in my films, not in going to bed. All he wanted to do was tell me how he had made a thorough study of medieval torture methods.
Modernizing them and will introduce them in Germany.
He just carried on without
I
a pause.
believe that this is the true way of ruling a people, for only by such methods can one enjoy the maximum of power.
He just went on, describing some of these methods in torture in such detail that it made my flesh creep. He asked me if I would come again tonight.
Well, then you must go.
Of course I will go, and I will seduce him. There will be no more talk of torture.
When asked if she succeeded in seducing Hitler, Zeisler said,
There was one occasion when she thought it was going to happen.
Hitler seemed to become quite excited, and I thought the moment had arrived when he would actually do something. But instead, he jumped to his feet and raised his arm in a Nazi salute and said, in a very bragging tone of voice,
I can hold my arm this way for an hour and a half at a time without tiring, while Goering could not hold his arm up for even 20 minutes.
One morning she arrived at the studio in a traumatized state. Zeisler tried to calm her down and she began to tell him about the evening before when she had been at the chancellery with Hitler. She said,
We both undressed, and I was sure it was going to happen.
he was the Fuhrer. She a loyal German, ready to do her duty. But she wasn't prepared for what Hitler had in mind. She told Zeisler,
He suddenly fell on the floor and begged me to kick him.
She looked down at the Fuhrer lying naked at her feet. She was ready to do her duty for the Fuhrer, but she was sickened. She told Zeisler,
He pleaded with me. He condemned himself as unworthy, and I finally gave in to his wishes. And as if nothing happened, he suggested we get dressed and thanked me for a pleasant evening.
This tale, as related by Alfred Zeisler, has been regarded by some historians as pure fiction. It certainly appears to be too sensational, presenting a cliched image of a mad dictator who can only enjoy kinky sex. Zeisler's critics claim he simply wanted his revenge on Hitler because Zeisler had had to leave Germany. But when the OSS interviewed Zeisler, he was on the verge of a new career outside of Germany. Nothing Zeisler told the OSS could remotely harm Hitler, so I think his account should not be too quickly disregarded. Alfred Zeisler's account of Renate Muller's sadomasochistic encounter with Hitler is very similar to what appeared in a book published in 1940 by Pauline Kohler called I Was Hitler's Maid. She'd escaped Germany in 1939, and a year later her book was published in America. The authenticity of its content has long been contested, largely because it reads like an American gossip magazine and is full of historical errors. But all that could be the fault of the editors. Pauline Kohler was a maid, not a writer, and the book is clearly ghost-written with a good deal of poetic license. Accounts of Hitler's sex life from Pauline Kohler and Alfred Zeisler are among the very few contemporary reports available, and they complement each other. And there are no authorised contemporary accounts about Hitler's private life. German history was what the Nazis said it was. The German people didn't even know Hitler had a mistress, Eva Braun, until after the war. Dr. Langer accepted Zeisler's account of Renate's encounters with Hitler and noted that several former Nazi officials reported that whenever Hitler was smitten with a girl, even in company, he had a tendency to grovel at her feet in what Dr. Langer described as a most disgusting manner. Langer reported that Hitler would tell the girl that he was unworthy to kiss her hand or sit near her, and that he hoped she would be kind to him. Dr. Langer concluded Hitler had a compulsion to completely degrade himself when he felt affection for a woman, but that these tendencies disgusted him, and he despised himself for his weakness. Hitler could flip that masochistic side on its head and become the dominating force. Perhaps Hitler's ability to get women, always much younger than he, to play his sex games, in which they inflicted pain and humiliation upon him, was a demonstration of his dominant power over them. He could get them to do what he wanted. Eva Braun, the young mistress he kept hidden from the world in his mountain retreat to Berghof, was an object of his domination and power. He completely controlled her, and she allowed him that pleasure. She had met Hitler when she worked for Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's official photographer. Eva was Hoffmann's assistant and model from the age of 17 and was 20 years younger than Hitler. The exact nature of Hitler's and Braun's sexual relationship has long been a matter of conjecture. Hitler was a voyeur, according to Ernst Röhm, the leader of the SA, who recalled,
He's thinking about the peasant girls when they stand in the fields and bend down at their work so that you can see their behinds. That's what he likes. That's Hitler's sex life.
I was under the impression that Hoffmann supplied Hitler with pornographic photographs. There was a very strange relationship between Hitler and Hoffmann.
like all good PR men, Goebbels' job was to prevent such information becoming public. As well as promoting Hitler and his cause, Goebbels was in control of all the German media, radio, newspapers, music, and especially films. He saw himself as Germany's premier movie mogul. He put tremendous pressure upon Renate to personify the perfect Aryan woman in his personally approved propaganda films. The constant stress of resisting Goebbels' attempts, which could land her in a concentration camp, led her to drink more than usual, and she began to put on weight. Goebbels had her put under surveillance by the Gestapo. When Hitler wanted female company, actresses from the UFA studios would be sent. Among them was one of the studio's biggest stars, Renate Muller. She found herself becoming involved in an increasingly bizarre relationship with the Fuhrer. What Hitler didn't know was that Renate had a long-time secret lover, George Deutsch, a Jew who had left Germany to escape increasing anti-Semitism While trying to deal with these complications in her life, Renate was resisting pressure from Goebbels to make anti-Semitic films. And so he put her under surveillance by the Gestapo. The next time Renate and George met, it was in Paris. They were being watched. Upon her return to Berlin, Renate was summoned to see Hitler.
He was alone. And for nearly 3 minutes, he never even looked at me.
Renate had no idea that Hitler had summoned her there to show her something. Something dangerous. She had no idea of the danger she was in.
I smiled and hoped for the best. Then he sprang to his feet.
Slut! You are wasted on the screen. I know all about your Paris trip.
I glanced at a photograph. It showed George and me with his arm in mine.
You should be on the streets of Berlin picking up men from the ghetto. I am not to be insulted like that. I am the Fuhrer!
He picked up the photographs and flung them in my face, and then suddenly burst into tears. I'm sorry I was wicked.
In fear for her life and seeing him momentarily vulnerable, she begged his forgiveness, and he told her,
I cannot hate you for long, but you must promise. Promise never to see him again.
I promise.
She promised so that she could survive. This account related by Renate to Pauline Kohler tells us something about her. She could have gone back to London with George to be safe, but she chose instead to return to Berlin. Why? The answer is because her film career and the fame she had was so important to her. Many stars paid the price for their careers in Nazi Germany, and Renate paid the price of losing the man she loved for the sake of her career. Renate was now warned that for engaging in a love affair with a Jew, she could face trial for race defamation, and if she was to see her lover again, she would end up in a concentration camp. Her get-out clause was to make one of Goebbels' propaganda films. She capitulated and made what was to be her final film, Togger. She played the daughter of a newspaper magnate whose business is overtaken by evil Jews. It was said that the pressure put upon her to make it and the constant surveillance by the Gestapo drove her over the edge, and she suffered a nervous breakdown. But there is another scenario which came from Hitler's former maid, Pauline Kohler, who claimed that Renate broke her promise not to see George ever again and met with him in Monte Carlo to give him a final goodbye with the intention of returning to Berlin to kill herself. He must have begged her to return with him to London.
Come with me.
Renate rushed back to Berlin, to her third-floor flat. Just before midnight, she jumped from the window. She survived the fall and was rushed to hospital, but doctors couldn't save her. Pauline Kohler believed the suicide story. This was the version of Renate's death that was spread among Hitler's domestic staff. It made sense to them because there was a history of the young women in Hitler's life attempting suicide, There was his niece Gellie, in whom he had an unusual, personal and possibly sexual interest, and English girl Unity Mitford, who came to Germany to meet her fascist idol, and Ava Braun. Gellie shot herself in the heart in 1931 with a Walther that belonged to Hitler. Unity Mitford shot herself in the head at the outbreak of war in 1939. Eva Braun shot herself in the chest in 1932. She survived. She had previously tried to kill herself over Hitler's involvement with Unity Mitford by taking an overdose of sleeping pills, but was discovered and rescued. Unity survived her attempt, but died in 1948 from a cerebral swelling around the lodged bullet, which doctors had decided was too dangerous to remove. Something about Hitler drove these young women to suicide. Hitler often threatened to commit suicide during moments of crisis, and finally shot himself in the head at the moment he lost the war, with Ava at his side, taking her life with a cyanide capsule. Did Hitler's obsession with suicide somehow become instilled in the women in his life? Or was it simply that his extreme behaviour drove them to it? It was perfectly feasible for Pauline Kohler and the rest of the domestic staff to believe that Renate had killed herself. If suicide was her option, then she had realised her film career was over. The story of Renate's final moments could hardly be more tragically dramatic. But I just don't buy it. Why would she meet with George in Monte Carlo and then return to Berlin to kill herself? The only reason Renate went back to Berlin was not to die, but because she believed she could keep on working, and she still had her fame. Dr. Langer, in his profile on Hitler, accepted the suicide verdict, but he hadn't set out to solve how she died, just to discover what was in the mind of Adolf Hitler. He had murder in mind. Of course, Hitler never did the killing himself, and he never usually gave a direct order, but hinted at what he wanted, and it was left to the likes of Goebbels and Heinrich Himmler to understand his wants and to carry them out. There is no record of Hitler ever giving a direct order that the Jews should be exterminated, but Himmler knew that's exactly what Hitler had in mind. Hypnotist Erich Jan Hannessen, who had taught Hitler performing techniques, was a Jew, and Hitler never wanted it known that his success was due partly to a Jew, so Ernst Röhm had Hannessen murdered. Even Ernst Röhm was condemned to death when he became a rival for the leadership of the Nazi Party. Himmler saw to it that all SA officers were murdered. Hitler allowed Röhm to take his own life. Hitler was not only jilted, but was also fearful that Renate was in possession of the knowledge and experience of his masochistic tendency. Goebbels knew this. Himmler knew this. Renate would have been marked for death. Pauline Kohler would not have known this. The suicide story was being spoken of among Hitler's domestic staff, and so Pauline Kohler related Renate's death from hearsay. But there were witnesses to Renate's death, and what they saw contradicted everything the Nazis had said. When German film star Renate Muller fell to her death on the 7th of October 1937, the Nazi-run news media claimed that she had thrown herself from a third-storey hospital window. Hitler's domestic staff believed that she had jumped from her third-floor apartment. A suicide, possibly over a broken heart and a broken career. Those living in Germany in the 1930s were living in the dark. Few dared to speak their mind. With the memory of Muller obliterated from the German mind, someone, and we don't know if it was one person or more, had seen Renate die, and they stayed silent. Until eventually they began to whisper what they had seen, which was Gestapo officers arriving at a Berlin hotel. Staying at that hotel was Renate Muller. Why was she there? Knowing her apartment was being watched, she probably thought that here she might be safe. She wasn't. Within minutes of the Gestapo arriving, Renate was seen falling to her death. According to Pauline Kohler, Hitler was at the Berghof when the news reached him of Renate's death. For the next 2 days he screamed threats against the Jews.
This war can only end with the destruction of the Jews.
In Berlin, Goebbels had all her possessions seized. Was he hoping to discover any evidence Renate may have had of her affair with Hitler? Few things could have been worse for the image of the avuncular Fuhrer than revelations that he liked to be hurt by pretty young women. Renate would have to be silenced. But she had already told Alfred Zeisler. And Zeisler told the OSS, which was drawing up a profile of Hitler. Because America had been attacked at Pearl Harbor by Japan, which was Germany's ally, and Germany under Hitler was waging war on the world. Otherwise, Renate Muller might well have been forgotten forever. Perhaps many Germans had chosen to believe that the fate of the Jews was of no concern to them, but not to Renate for very personal reasons. Whatever evil the Jews had represented to Germany, a single Jew had represented only love to Renate.
Renate Muller was a blonde, like all the girls Hitler was attracted to. There was another tall, blonde girl named Löffler, who he was attracted to after Renate. In the midst of their relationship, the girl ran off with a Jew and lived in Paris. This upset Hitler so much. He never asked again for girls to keep him company.
Hitler had said the Third Reich would last for 1,000 years. After 5 years of war, German forces were being rounded up. He said that not a single Allied bomb would land on any German city. Dresden was almost bombed into extinction. After Hitler killed himself and the German High Command surrendered, the ordinary Germans were forced by the Allies to see for themselves the death camps. They were no longer ignorant of what had been happening to the Jews. They must have wondered if they could believe anything Hitler had told them. A few might have wondered what had really happened to Renate Muller. Almost certainly Renate Muller was murdered to protect the purity of the Fuhrer and because she loved a Jew and not Hitler. It's the only outcome that makes any sense once you understand that the suicide story is illogical and bogus, and that Goebbels arranged a botched cover-up. It didn't matter that Hitler was an ardent fan of Renate Muller. He felt betrayed and afraid. She had to die. Yet she would have lived if she had only left Germany and given up her career to be with George.
Come with me.
But fame and fortune has always been addictive, even in the Third Reich.